Okay, let's jump right in. We are doing a deep dive today into the Battle of Bannockburn, June 1314. And really, this is all about understanding how strategy, how sheer ingenuity pulled off this incredible David versus Goliath kind of victory.
That's a great way to put it. For you listening, we're looking at a really, really key moment in the First War of Scottish Independence. Our mission, basically, is to get past just the numbers, the huge English advantage, and really dig into the specific tactics, the almost surgical approach Robert the Bruce used. How did his forces manage to just, dismantle such a superior English army?
And pivotal is the right word. It really defined things. This wasn't just another battle won. It arguably secured Scotland's future. So the context. Yeah. It all happened over 2 days, June 23rd and 24th, 1314, right near Stirling Castle in Scotland. Stirling was under siege, so the pressure was really on.
And to really get how bold Bruce's plan was, you have to start with the odds. Because if you just look at the military thinking of the time, the early 14th century, comparing resources, the Scots shouldn't have stood a chance. Not really.
Let's start with the leaders. Scotland, King Robert the Bruce. He's fighting for his kingdom's very survival. And leading the English invasion, King Edward II. He had, probably the most professional, best-equipped army in Western Europe at the time.
And that army was just massive. Estimates do vary a bit. Historians debate the exact numbers, but the general idea is clear. The Scots probably had around 6,000 infantry, and maybe a few hundred light horsemen, mostly lightly equipped, relying on discipline and long spears.
Okay, now compare that to Edward II's force coming north. This wasn't just a raid, it was a full-scale invasion. We're talking maybe 13,000 infantry, including those deadly English longbowmen, plus a really powerful cavalry force, up to 3,000 heavily armored knights. Basically medieval tanks, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you've got roughly 16,000 English troops facing maybe 6,500 Scots. That's more than 2-to-1 odds just in men. But the quality gap, especially with cavalry and archers, that makes the imbalance even starker. If this had been fought on an open field, Edward II had every reason to expect a quick, decisive victory. He had the numbers, the heavy armor, the mobility.
So the challenge is laid out. How do you beat a force that's twice your size and packed with the best heavy cavalry around?
Well, you realize you just can't meet them head-on, not on their terms. And this is where Robert the Bruce's strategic genius really shines. He knew open battle was suicide. His strategy wasn't about trying to somehow overcome the English advantage. It was about nullifying it completely, turning the battlefield itself into a place where numbers and cavalry become, liabilities instead of assets.
He didn't just pick a good spot, he basically engineered a kill zone. Tell us about that positioning he chose, this wooded, defendable area south of Stirling Castle.
Right, the location was absolutely key. You had two main features, the thick woods of the new park and this winding river, the Bannockburn, running right through it. Bruce didn't need a battle of maneuver. He needed to force the English into a kind of static fight. So he deliberately set up his troops to funnel that huge English army into a confined space.
Wait a minute, though. If Edward II had such a massive army, why would he let himself be funneled like that? Couldn't he just, go around, bypass the prepared ground?
That's a really critical point. The thing forcing Edward's hand was Stirling Castle. He was literally racing against the clock. There was this truce agreement, right? It said if Stirling wasn't relieved by June 24th, the Scottish garrison inside would surrender to Bruce. That would be a huge win for the Scots. So Edward felt he had to take the most direct route, even though it was the most dangerous, to relieve the castle immediately. Time was against him. Necessity basically forced him right into Bruce's trap.
Okay, that timing detail changes everything. Bruce wasn't just using the terrain. He was exploiting his enemy's own strategic needs.
Precisely. And once Edward was committed to that narrow approach, Bruce added his own modifications. He didn't just rely on the natural landscape, he engineered obstacles, specifically designed to turn that boggy approach into a death trap for heavy cavalry.
We're talking about those infamous anti-cavalry ditches, the pots. What exactly were they? Why were they so devastating against 14th century knights?
Yeah, they weren't just simple trenches. The sources describe them more like shallow pits, sometimes camouflaged with branches or netting. Their main goal wasn't necessarily to kill the horses, but to break their momentum, to trip them up, throw them off balance, crucially, to break the charge.
So kind of like tripwires for armored knights on horseback.
More than that, really. They forced these incredibly expensive, heavily armored knights to halt, to break formation. Suddenly, instead of an unstoppable shock weapon, you have vulnerable, static targets. A knight falling into a ditch becomes a very heavy, very confused guy struggling to get back up. It completely neutralized the one thing the English really relied on for breaking enemy lines.
Which brings us to the Scottish secret weapon, if you can call it that. The thing that really defined their resistance against English heavy cavalry. Those disciplined infantry formations, the schiltrons.
Yes, the schiltron. The word itself just means battle array or formation. It was the absolute centerpiece of Bruce's defense. Now, it wasn't entirely new. It had been used before, most famously at the Battle of Falkirk about 15 years earlier, which was a disaster for the Scots. But Bruce, he perfected its use at Bannockburn.
Why did it work so well here then, when it failed so badly against Edward Surreist at Falkirk?
Good question. At Falkirk, the schiltrons were basically left exposed in the open. The English longbowmen just flanked them and rained arrows down, devastating them before the cavalry even got close. But at Bannockburn, Bruce was smart. He placed his schiltrons strategically. Woods and the river protected their flanks. This meant the English archers couldn't easily get into position to target them effectively. So these formations, these dense circles or rectangles, bristling with 7, maybe 8-foot spears and pikes.
Like a human porcupine, right?
Exactly, a perfect analogy. So when the English cavalry, already struggling through the bog and the pits, finally reached the Scottish lines, they hit this impenetrable wall of spikes. The discipline needed to hold that formation under pressure was just incredible. A schiltron wasn't meant to maneuver much. It was designed to hold ground, to absorb the charge. It turned the battlefield into a meat grinder where the knights couldn't use their speed or mass effectively at all.
So let's talk about how the battle actually unfolded. The sources seem to suggest the English advance was pretty chaotic right from the start on June 23rd, the first day, largely because of that difficult terrain around the Bannockburn.
Yeah, that initial phase was really a tactical mess for the English. They made several attempts to cross the burn and get through the marshy ground, and they failed badly. Led to some early isolated fights. There's that famous dramatic moment highlighted in the chronicles. Robert the Bruce himself, leading from the front, is confronted by an English knight, Sir Henry de Bohun. De Bohun charges him, thinking he can win the whole battle right there by killing the Scottish king.
And Bruce meets this charging knight, not with another knight, but personally, with a battle axe. That's just an amazing image of leadership.
It's totally iconic, and it immediately sent a message to both armies about the kind of fight this was going to be. Bruce kills de Bohun with one blow. That single act on the first day, plus the successful defense of those narrow crossings, seems to have really shaken the English command. Demoralizing.
Then the second day, June 24th, that's when the real chaos, the strategic breakdown for the English seems to have happened.
Yes. Edward II, apparently desperate to get his army onto more solid ground where they could form up properly, moved his entire massive force overnight onto the north bank of the Bannockburn, but this just made things worse. Now he was trapped. He had the high ground held by the Scots on one side and this winding, marshy river behind him, and on another flank. There was simply no room to properly deploy his huge numbers, especially those crucial longbowmen needed to break the schiltrons.
So the English advance stalled. They were bogged down, packed shoulder to shoulder, basically perfect targets, unable to fight effectively.
Exactly. Compressed, disorganized. And then the Scottish schiltrons, who were comparatively fresh and incredibly disciplined, did something unexpected. They began to advance, downhill, out of the woods. This caught the English totally off guard. The Scots moved forward, shouting their battle cries. Imagine the psychological impact. This wasn't just a passive defense anymore. This was an offensive push by infantry formations that were supposed to just stand there.
And the result was an absolute rout, wasn't it? Those dense English formations just couldn't maneuver, couldn't get their archers into play. They just collapsed inward.
Total panic. The sources describe the English reserve forces seeing the main line buckle in that confined space. They tried to push forward to help, but just added to the crush. Utter chaos. The accounts are pretty clear. The defeat was swift and decisive once that Scottish advance began.
And we come back to that really striking detail. King Edward II himself fled the battlefield.
Yeah, his flight basically sealed the deal. Edward abandoned his army, rode hard for Dunbar Castle to escape. When the king bolts like that, any shred of order just evaporates. And this led to absolutely staggering casualties for the English. It really highlights the scale of the tactical disaster.
Let's lay out those grim numbers. English losses were horrific. Estimates are around, 10,000 men? killed, captured, or even drowned trying to escape across the river.
Yeah.
And the Scottish losses.
Remarkably light in comparison, probably no more than 1,000, maybe 2,000 at the most, significantly lower than some of the higher figures you sometimes see quoted. Bannockburn wasn't just a victory, it was a crippling blow to English manpower, to their treasury, and certainly to their morale.
So if we connect this back to the bigger picture, Bannockburn wasn't just a military triumph, it was like a political earthquake, right?
Yep.
The effects lasted for centuries.
Absolutely pivotal. Politically, first off, it cemented Robert the Bruce's position. Remember, he'd been a disputed king. He'd been fighting other Scots as much as the English. Bannockburn pretty much ended that. It gave him the undeniable support of the Scottish nobility and the people.
And this incredible tactical victory eventually paved the way for the official end of that particular war.
It did. Now, the fighting didn't start overnight, but the momentum shifted massively. Edward II never really recovered his authority or prestige after this. Eventually, his successor had little choice but to formally recognize Scottish independence. That came with the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328, 14 years after Bruce masterminded this battle.
So the legacy seems pretty clear. Bannockburn is still this huge cultural landmark. It's kind of the ultimate proof that smart tactics, understanding your environment, and sheer discipline can overcome just brute force, overwhelming numbers.
That really is the core takeaway for you, the listener, today. Bannockburn wasn't won just by courage or determination, though there was plenty of that. It was won by superior intellect, superior preparation. Robert the Bruce mastered the battlefield, the terrain, the constraints, the timing, long before the first English knight even saw a Scot. He made the English advantages in numbers and heavy cavalry almost irrelevant.
An incredible lesson in strategy, really.
It truly is. And as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe we can leave you with a final thought to chew on based on this amazing piece of history. How often, really, throughout military history, does a commander's deep, almost intimate knowledge of the ground, of the terrain and geography, prove to be fundamentally more decisive than having way more soldiers and better gear? And maybe what blind spots do modern forces still have when maybe they prioritize technology over really understanding the environment they're operating in? Something to think about.
Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at 1314, the Battle of Bannockburn. And really, the core of it, the big question, is how Robert the Bruce managed this victory.
Right, a much smaller army facing this huge English force. It looks impossible on paper.
Exactly. And our sources suggest it wasn't luck, it was strategy. It was almost like engineering the battlefield itself.
That's the paradox we're digging into. How does the underdog win so decisively? And yeah, the sources point towards a mix of things: terrain, troop formations, even psychology.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to pull out those specific, maybe surprising tactical elements that explain how the Scots got this win, which was just massive for their independence fight.
Precisely. It's about the recipe Bruce used. Let's break it down.
First ingredient, then, seems to be the ground itself. I find that fascinating, using geography as your opening move. Bruce knew the English strength was their heavy cavalry, right?
Absolutely. Numbers, yes, but crucially, the shock power of knights on horseback. Bruce's first masterstroke was picking a spot that basically nullified that advantage.
Near the Bannockburn stream.
Yes. The ground there, it was marshy in places, the Carse, they called it, and it naturally funneled any large army moving through.
So the English couldn't just spread out and charge, they were constricted.
Exactly. Constricted by the stream on one side, marshy ground on the other. It forced them into a bottleneck. Think about it. Heavy horses need space, firm ground to build up speed for that devastating charge.
And Bannockburn denied them both.
It did. The terrain became a force multiplier for Bruce. Suddenly, his smaller army could face the English more or less head-on in that confined space. It leveled the playing field, almost literally.
Okay, so you funnel the enemy, but you still need to stop that charge, even a slower, cramped one. That brings us to the schiltrons.
Ah, the famous schiltrons, these dense formations of infantry.
We hear about them as these hedgehog formations bristling with spears, but what made them so effective or different from other infantry blocks of the time?
Well, two main things. The length of the spears, or pikes, they used much longer than typical infantry weapons, maybe 18 feet or even more.
Right, creating this impassable wall of points.
Impassable is the right word. And the second thing was discipline. These weren't just mobs with long spears. They were drilled, cohesive units. Think solid, moving blocks, designed specifically, almost geometrically, to halt cavalry.
Okay, so they're defensive powerhouses. But the sources say Bruce didn't just defend with them, he used them offensively. That sounds incredibly risky.
It was risky, and that's maybe Bruce's real innovation here. The schiltron idea wasn't brand new, but using them to advance, that was different.
How do you even do that? Keeping thousands of men with massive pikes tightly packed while marching over uneven, potentially boggy ground towards an enemy.
Discipline. Intense training, cohesion. If that formation broke its ranks, even slightly, cavalry could pour into the gaps, archers could pick them apart. It required immense control.
So Bruce trained them not just to stand, but to push, like a slow-moving battering ram.
Exactly. A disciplined, bristling wall rolling forward, forcing the English back onto difficult ground, breaking their lines through sheer organized pressure.
That's quite the image. So you've got terrain neutralizing the cavalry and these unique formations ready to receive and push back. But defense, even aggressive defense, isn't always enough, is it? You need an element of surprise.
You do. And Bruce managed that too, which is pretty remarkable given the scale here. He didn't just line up his whole army in plain sight.
How did he achieve surprise?
He used the landscape again, concealed large parts of his force, entire divisions in nearby woods, behind hills, out of sight.
Masking his true numbers and where they were positioned.
Right up until the last critical moment. Total radio silence, if you like. The English didn't really know the full extent of what they were facing or where it would come from.
And that critical moment, the timing was key, wasn't it? He waited.
He waited until the English were most vulnerable, crossing the Bannockburn itself.
So catching them literally midstream, or struggling up the banks.
Precisely. Imagine the scene. Edward II's army, huge and probably overconfident, trying to execute this complex maneuver, getting thousands of men, horses, equipment across a stream, up steep, muddy banks, and then trying to form up for battle while they're wet, disordered, maybe even panicked.
Their formations would be completely broken.
Exactly.
Right.
Before the main clash even properly started, their numbers almost became a disadvantage, a logistical nightmare in that confined, difficult space.
So the trap is sprung, the English are disorganized, caught crossing the stream. Now the Scots make their move. You mentioned divisions.
Yes, Bruce had organized his army, sources suggest, into 4 main divisions, each under experienced commanders. This wasn't just a single wave, it suggests coordination.
And it wasn't just the schiltrons charging forward, was it? There was support.
Right. Bruce also used light horse cavalry, not to charge the English knights head-on. That would be suicide.
So what was their role?
Surgical strikes. Their main job was likely to harass and disrupt the English archers. Longbowmen could potentially devastate the tightly packed, slow-moving schiltrons from a distance.
So the light horse were there to neutralize the archers, protecting the schiltrons as they advanced. Smart. Thinking ahead.
Very much so. It shows Bruce was considering the counters to his own tactics. With the archers suppressed, the schiltrons could do their work.
Which was essentially pushing the disordered English back against the stream.
Crushing them. Remember, the English couldn't easily retreat because of the steep banks and the water behind them. They couldn't effectively advance because of the terrain and the advancing wall of pikes. They were trapped.
Pinioned. Using a defensive formation as an offensive steamroller. That's tactically brilliant.
It really rejected the standard military thinking of the time.
But even with all that, the English still had huge numbers. Reserves, surely. Fresh troops they could throw in.
They did, and this is where Bruce plays his, perhaps his most cunning card, the psychological game.
Okay, how so? He knew they had reserves waiting.
He must have. He faced the reality that even if his initial attack went well, sheer weight of numbers could eventually overwhelm his tired troops. So he needed to prevent those reserves from ever fully committing.
How do you do that?
Deception, a brilliant piece of battlefield theater.
The small folk. Is that what this is?
That's the story, yes. Bruce apparently gathered his camp followers, servants, men, women, anyone not actually fighting, gave them banners, maybe some basic equipment, and had them appear over a ridge on the flank or rear at a crucial moment.
Creating the illusion of what? A whole fresh Scottish army arriving.
Exactly, the Great Array, as it's sometimes called. Imagine you're an English soldier, your front line is collapsing, you're trapped by the burn, and suddenly you see thousands more enemies appearing on the horizon.
You'd think we're surrounded, it's over. Panic.
Total panic among the ranks. But maybe more importantly, it paralyzed the English command. Edward II sees this, sees his lines crumbling.
And he holds back his reserves. Thinks about getting himself out.
He thinks the situation is completely hopeless. Why throw good troops after bad? That feigned reinforcement shattered their remaining morale and, crucially, their command cohesion. The fight just went out of them.
Wow. So it wasn't just physical defeat, but a perceived overwhelming defeat amplified by this trick.
Perception became reality on that field. Fear and disorder did the rest.
That's incredible large-scale psychology. But there was also a key moment of personal leadership right at the start, wasn't there? Something that boosted Scottish morale enormously.
Yes. The duel, Robert the Bruce himself, and the English knight Henry de Bohun.
Tell us about that. De Bohun saw Bruce out in front of the lions.
He did. Bruce was apparently doing a final inspection or positioning his troops, maybe a bit exposed. De Bohun, perhaps seeing a chance for glory, maybe to end the war in one stroke, charged him.
A full, heavy cavalry charge straight at the Scottish king.
A massive gamble. Bruce was on a smaller horse, a pony really, and lightly armored compared to De Bohun in full plate with a lance.
What did Bruce do?
Legend has it, he didn't flinch. He waited, swerved his pony at the last second to avoid the lance, stood up in his stirrups, and brought his battle axe down squarely on De Bohun's helmet,
Cleaving it and his head in two.
That's the account. A single devastating blow.
The psychological impact of that must have been immense on both sides.
Absolutely. For the Scots, seeing their king face down and kill a champion English knight in single combat, it was seen as heroic, almost an omen of victory, massive morale boost.
And for the English.
Utterly demoralizing. Their champion, representing their perceived superiority, cut down instantly by the man they considered a rebel. It would have shaken their confidence right at the outset.
It showed Bruce wasn't just directing. He was willing to fight and risk everything himself.
Precisely. That kind of personal courage from a leader was incredibly powerful in medieval warfare. It cemented loyalty and resolve like almost nothing else.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. We've got terrain, innovative formations used offensively, perfect timing, psychological warfare on a grand scale, and this incredible act of personal leadership. It's not one single thing, is it?
Not at all. It's a chain reaction, a cascade of smart decisions and calculated risks. You can almost see it in phases.
Read them out for us.
Phase 1, geography. Using the ground to neutralize the English cavalry threat. Phase 2, formations. The disciplined schiltrons, ready to defend and attack.
Okay.
Phase 3, timing and surprise. Concealing forces and attacking when the enemy was crossing the stream, totally disorganized. Phase 4, psychology. The small folk trick amplifying panic and breaking command, coupled with Bruce's personal bravery setting the tone.
Put all those together.
And you get Bannockburn, a decisive, almost textbook victory against the odds.
And the sources are clear. This wasn't just another battle. This was the battle that really solidified the path to Scottish independence, a landmark moment.
Undeniably pivotal. It's a masterclass, really, in how strategic thinking, innovation, and leadership can overcome seemingly overwhelming material disadvantages.
A truly remarkable story.
And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? Bruce's success here wasn't just about having a specific weapon or troop type. It was about applying intelligence to, well, to geometry, geography, even human perception.
Using everything available.
Everything. Which makes you wonder, and this is maybe something for you, the listener, to mull over. How often is it that facing severe limits like Bruce's smaller army and fewer resources actually forces the greatest leaps in tactical thinking? Does necessity really mother invention, especially in warfare?
A fascinating question to end on. Thanks for walking us through the tactical genius behind Bannockburn.
My pleasure. It's an endlessly compelling battle.
Indeed. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.